What is your
Sure.
first impression from this collision?
The first impression I had, Kristen, was the fact that the video does show that both aircraft are at the same altitude. The helicopter itself, I could tell immediately when I looked at that video that the aircraft, the helicopter, was not passing in front of the regional jet, but rather behind it. And you could tell that by looking at the lights and the blossoming of the landing lights. The question is, how is it that that aircraft was in that piece of airspace at that altitude? Again, based on what Courtney had just said about the restriction at 200 feet, this system has been safe for a very long time. I grew up in the area. I've flown in that area quite a bit throughout my life. And, you know, it is just normal part of Washington, D.C. flying, especially when you have special use airport criteria for commercial pilots going into Washington National. And, of course, the military running those low-level routes, as well as the National Park Service and the police. The question is, what got them off their altitude? Was it something that they did because of the weather? Was it something that, again, they were doing because they thought they were somewhere else and started to climb? All of these questions are going to be incumbent upon the NTSB to try and ferret out what got the military aircraft above its restricted altitude.
And just to follow up with you on that point, I think a lot of people look at that video, which is so difficult to look at. It is so tragic. And you see the helicopter moving forward and really doesn't change course at all. And a lot of people are wondering, how is it possible that the pilot didn't see the plane in front of it? Is that something that happens at night? Is that one of the things that makes flying at night so challenging?
That's a very good question. And yes, if you were to take that same event with the same flight paths and you have it during daylight hours, this accident 98.999% of the time will not happen. Just because you can see the aircraft, you know, looking out there, you have visual cues. At night, it is totally different because especially with the collision angles that the NTSB is going to have to derive. How was the helicopter approaching this fixed-wing regional jet? If they're getting a profile view, all you're going to see really are the position lights, and in this case, probably the green light on the right wingtip, maybe the strobe on the belly of the aircraft, maybe a position light. But those lights being at that elevation over an urban area can actually blend into the background. And then, of course, there's been a question about were one or both pilots using night vision goggles. That creates a lot of problems, especially in an urban environment where you have a lot of blossoming white light that can provide temporary blindness. But again, was there a misidentification of the airplane that was called by the air traffic controller? There are a lot of questions to be answered. We saw with the Los Angeles accident when a commuter airline was struck by a landing 737 U.S. Air because the pilots thought that the lights from the aircraft were part of the runway environment. Things do happen, and that's why it's going to be very incumbent upon the NTSB to be thorough and methodical in developing all of the backstory, all of the facts and conditions, so that we can understand what may have happened.
Just very quickly, Greg, we've been reporting that there was one controller when usually there would have been two staffed. Do you think that could have factored into this horrific tragedy?
I think there is going to be an issue with that. Of course, that during peak periods, you want the maximum amount of controllers. But in this case, based on the procedures that the FAA has in place, you can combine positions. This isn't the first time that the NTSB has identified that combining positions may have been a cause or a contributing factor in an accident. And I think that that's going to be a very good focal point for the board to look at, because again, we're in this controller shortage, just like a pilot shortage and even an aviation mechanic shortage. And with this being a recurrent theme, this is not something that just happened overnight. This has been going on for some little while because of funding and, of course, trying to develop and recruit people to take over the retiring controller workforce.
Greg Feith, we always appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.